Welcome back to Double Fries No Slaw. Clay Fink, Noles 24/7. I always say 247, and then I get corrected every time I say that. Not by you, but like, hey, it's actually 24/7. I'm like, all right, listen here. Let's
I don't
slow
know.
down just a little bit. But I'm going to say 24/7 this time. But Clay, you were recently at a coaching event that several FSU coaches were at. We'll talk about Mike Norvell specifically and some of the things that he talked about there. But man, I appreciate you joining me. How you doing, bud?
Pretty good. Yeah, I struggle also with the 247, 24/7. I've never really known. I should probably
It's
clarify that with some of
It's
my
less 247
coworkers.
is less syllables. Like that's the I'm just
It
letting you know.
is,
Like it's one less
but
syllable. So
then where did they come with the 247?
yeah,
Like, is that just a random array of number? I don't know. It doesn't make sense. I got to clarify that.
all day, all week, 24/7. I mean, I get the idea of
Yeah,
247,
right. Yeah.
but anyway, yeah, 24. I'm gonna say 247. I don't care what Brendan or anybody else says. So you were there with Mike Norvell, and I know Brendan wrote an article about this too, so we'll link that in the description if people kind of want a little more detail. But I want to get like, what was his mood like? Because and he even addressed this, I think, and we'll talk more about the meat or the content of it. But I think so many fans could just see how dejected he was all year, and 2-10 will deject a lot of people. So it's not
Yeah.
just him, right? Like we all felt it too.
Right.
But I think fans complained, or even if they weren't complaining, they just noticed, like, man, in post practice interviews, in post game interviews, just halftime interviews, whatever, man. Like he just felt like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and he certainly let that show. Does he seem to be out of that some? Like, is there a new pet? Like, because what people talked about before, and you'll remember this, every recruit, every player, every media
Oh
person, every
yeah.
fan, oh my gosh, Mike Norvell's energy is just a
Yeah.
million percent. He just never stops. And he's just, this fiery guy. I'm even in his open, I went back and watched his introductory press conference on Seminoles.com. And I mean, he sounded like a Baptist preacher. Like he was just like hellfire and brimstone, bringing it. And that was certainly not what he was like this year. It was like, what
No.
was his attitude? What was his mood like there?
I don't want to get off topic, but before Norvell spoke, we got to hear from Eastern Michigan longtime head coach Chris Creighton, maybe the most attention grabbing public speaker I've ever seen in my entire life. I mean, that guy, he'll just be talking and then all of a sudden he's screaming at the top of his lungs. I've never seen anything like it. Like, genuinely, no exaggeration. That guy, everything he says, he means it. And that's kind of Norvell's MO. And it wasn't his MO this year, especially, the getting loud and passionate about certain subjects really wasn't something you saw post practice, post game, in any sort of media setting. And I was thinking, and I talked to my coworker, like, how is Norvell going to follow this up? Because that should be something he's not worrying about. But based on what we saw last year, I mean, who knows what he's going to look like. I would say there was a moment or two where he kind of looked like last year's Norvell, but I mean, he was energetic. He was, and part of that can be attributed to maybe being generally faced with coaches as opposed to
Yeah.
media members, but he was energetic. He was passionate. He sounded confident that, the message that he gave this same group of coaches last year about responding to past difficulties, he was passionate that this team might not have done it and, lived up to what he believes in and what he holds the program to, but he really seemed confident that this upcoming year's team, can get back to that. And multiple times did he mention that I look forward to being back on this stage this time next year and, being back to where we were a year ago. So it was just sort of a reinvigorated figure.
Yeah, and I don't even, and I said all that, and maybe I should have justified or like talked about this before. I don't even know that anybody blames him for not being like the
Right.
fiery preacher. I mean, how does that sound at
Right.
1-9, right? How does that sound when you're winning 2 games a year? So I don't
Right.
even know that I blame him. I just think it was just such a stark contrast from what we had seen before that it kind of shocked everybody, right? Like it was like, my goodness, what, where did this guy's passion go? And down the drain with the rest of the season, right? And you, like you said, you hope he can kind of rebound as they move
Right.
into 25. Does he, we'll get into the meat after this one, but we talked about this a little bit off air. I've been in some media settings with him, and then I've been in some very informal settings with him where I feel like he loosens up a little bit more. He's not as listen. I like Norvell, but I think his press conferences are like most coaches' press conferences. Like they just stink,
Yeah.
right? Like most coaches are just there. Then nobody gives a straight answer in college football. Maybe Lane, Dilly,
Yeah.
but like there's like three guys, Dion. But like they don't, most coaches don't. Does he,
Right.
I don't know if there's a question and answer time. I don't know like what the format was, but does he seem to loosen up more like when it's other coaches as opposed to a media setting?
So there's not a question and answer, and I wouldn't say he started. I mean, he started off, and I kind of was just thinking to myself, like, man, did I even need to come here? Like, it kind of felt like one of his, introductory statements at any of his press conferences he's ever done, post practice, post game. Um, it took a while, and I think honestly, being like raw about how he felt about last season and their performance, like I think that kind of opened him up. And it almost felt like he was going off script at times afterwards, just really like trying to get coaches to resonate with like he had some difficulties maintaining the culture across the roster this year and things that like high school coaches understand, they relate to. It started off with you know kind of having to address what happened this last season. It just felt very coach speak. It felt like something I'd heard before, talking, whether it was about the early signing day commits, the transfer portal additions. It just felt like to start the same message he's been giving, and then he kind of opened up, and yeah, he definitely said some things that are out of his typical range of like things that you can expect Norvell to share in a media setting.
What how did you like? I mean, I've seen him whether he's been on with went on with RG3. He's talked in different settings about like getting this thing turned around and getting it fixed and getting it headed in the right direction. And obviously any coach would, right? Like no coach is gonna be like, yeah, man, I don't know, we're just gonna figure it out. So like I expect there to be a level of, and even if you're not confident in it, you're gonna project confidence and you're gonna at the very least pretend that you're confident because you want people to come out and
Right.
watch the team and hopefully you do turn it around and you want to project confidence for your players. But like with some of the things he talked about, like what were some of the high level kind of like takeaways that you had on some of the ownership that he's taken? And as much as we want to blame him and point that there were a lot of reasons that the team struggled last year that weren't just Norvell's fault. Now ultimately he's the head man, and so the blame ultimately goes to him. But there were a lot of things that like Norvell didn't just forget how to coach football, right? Like he didn't just, oh my gosh, what, how do I call a play or do this or that and the other. Thoughts on just like what he said and how it came across and some of the messages that he did give.
Yeah, one of the biggest statements he made on the entire day was, he addressed that something he's always been very focused on is his body language, whether it's on the sideline, in practice, in the weight room, talking to the media. He's very big on his body language. And he straight up said, like, my body language sucked at times last year. Like, that's ownership, that's him. And that's something we all saw. And like you said, we understand it would have been kind of weird if he was going out there and talking about going on a run and, winning every game remaining on the schedule or something like that every week, which is kind of his typical DNA, the stuff you see of him. He, I think he's, I think self reflection, and a lot of people have talked about this, is not the strength of this program. Self reflection, self evaluation. Like there were holes both in the program and the roster after the 13-0 season, and they were not addressed in any form or fashion. Um, it seems like that's improved, and I think that Norvell being able to like openly admit that his body language sucked at times last year, like that's kind of a microcosm of that. Like he's even reflecting on himself individually, despite the entire team underwhelming, the entire staff to some degree underwhelming. He is taking the time to like embrace and understand what he did wrong. And I mean, he's just ready. It sounds like one of the big things last year with returning players in general, especially on the defense, was kind of, teetering towards going into the portal in order to maximize their NIL, maximize, their benefits. And Norvell kind of just like came out and said, I don't remember the exact quote, but like that, like he was not going to allow that this year. There was not going to be players taking advantage of the program, just kind of embracing that like the program is bigger than the players that are a part of it. And yeah, I mean, I think parts of his message were things you wouldn't expect him to share with the media because they were very transparent, like the thing about, players negotiating. He didn't put it quite as point blank as I am, but players negotiating, holding the program hostage, things like that. That's not something he would discuss in the media, but I do feel like this whole kind of message that he's giving off is similar to what he would tell the media, and it's just stronger. I think he's willing to be more transparent with these coaches. I think he's confident. Like I think he's like especially confident. I keep coming back to how often he would say, you're going to see me back on this stage next year, and the message is going to be able to resonate a lot better because we're going to be coming off a much better season. He kind of leaned into the jokes at certain points. He'd joke about, like, I'm sure you're thinking about how bad our team was this year. And now I'm up here. And I think he embraces it almost. And I don't think I would have said that even, a month ago. But
Yeah.
it was it was it was very transparent, and it was very motivating. Like I really do think that he has belief in this roster, has belief in this staff, and I think he believes that this team can like. I mean, we're talking about 7-8 wins is kind of what the national consensus is right now. I think he'd be extremely disappointed with that, and I'm sure he would have been extremely disappointed with 2 wins, but I do think, mid-season 2024 Mike Norvell, maybe if you gave him this roster and told him you guys just went 2-10, what are you going to do? Maybe he'd say 7 or 8 wins. But the Norvell I saw this past weekend, I don't think so, man. Like he was fired up. He's ready to get back to what he looks like. I mean, I'm not gonna, change my win projections over what I saw at a coaching clinic, but I think a lot of the concerns about Norvell, like losing his fire or anything like that, like I think we can kind of brush that away. I think he's brushed last season away, so I think
Yeah.
we can too.
I mean, that's exactly what I was going to ask you next. So you kind of answered it. So I won't, I won't make you go too much deeper into that. But that was going to be my question is like, every coach is going to project confidence. Like nobody was going to go to that thing and say like, oh yeah, we might suck again next year. Right. Like that would be a
Right.
very weird thing for any coach to
Yeah.
say. But I was going to ask like how you perceived it. I was going to ask like, did it sound like the confidence that he was projecting? Did it sound like, something that you would expect him to really believe it, or is he just kind of saying it because those are the right things to say? I mean, you could have answered it there. So again, you don't have to expound on it in a crazy detailed way again. But
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that's comforting, and I'm kind of with you, right? Like, I mean, after a 2-10 season, like I'm not going to say like, oh man, Clay was fired up because of what he heard from Mike Norvell, like
Right.
beating Bama by 20, or anything crazy.
Yeah,
like that.
right.
There's still really tough games against really talented teams on the schedule, and we know what the
Definitely.
big 4 games are on the schedule. But I'd certainly prefer you to come away from this thinking, all right, he does believe, and he might be wrong
Right.
again. Like he might
Right.
absolutely be wrong, and they might blow it again, right? Like they might miss a bowl, like who knows? But I do think just the fact that he is projecting that confidence and has that confidence in his team, his roster, the staff. Obviously, there were a ton of changes that we've talked about a ton. I mean, I think that's a positive sign, right? Now you ain't
Definitely.
winning games in the fall because of what some coach says at a clinic on a Saturday in February. But I mean, you'd
Definitely not.
certainly prefer that over, man, he just looked the same as he did. He looked like the same broken person that he was in November. He looked like the
Right.
same guy that he was back in October when everything was going to hell. So I mean, I do think that's a positive to pull from it. Not a positive again where I'm going to say like, up 10 wins or
Right.
bust. But I think that's a good sign for Florida State fans.
Yeah, I think you can't let's say that he did have a modest projection for this team. And honestly, by Florida State standards, that's 7 or 8 wins, and that's kind of what Vegas has projected for this team. Maybe a modest projection by Florida State standards. He absolutely would not share that in a media setting, in a setting when he's speaking to the Seminole boosters. Would he hint at it in like a coaching setting? Maybe not like outright say like this is going to be a 6 to 8 win team, but like would he? It was
We
just
can talk
very
about things like
assertive.
rebuilding.
Everything he
Yeah,
said, it was just so like we're going to be back. We're going to be like there was no hedging, and this is not a media. I'm media. I was there, but generally this is not a media setting. I feel like you can be maybe more transparent than you can in other situations where he's publicly speaking. And there was no hedging. There was
yeah.
no, I have, this doubt or like none of that. It sounded just like last year, and that's going to give people, PTSD, but he was confident last year. He's generally been confident the last few years. And I think there was a real question of will he be confident in this team? Because I think at a point in last season, he wasn't, and understandably so. And we all think, of course he wasn't. But I don't think he was confident in the team he had at the time this past season.
Yeah.
And that's easy for us to say, they won 2 games, but he built that whole roster. These are guys that, like, he's been around for years. He knows what they are, or so he thought. And so it's like, how do you handle that? How do you bounce back from that? And I think he understands that. And yeah, like I said, I'm not changing any win projections based on this weekend, but it's certainly better that I came away thinking it was all genuine hope and belief that they're going to bounce back, than seeming like coach speak or him, being transparent and saying this team is not going to, bounce back. So
Yeah.
I think he genuinely believes it.
And I think a lot of that makes sense. Like, yeah, I am sure that there was a point in last year, and I don't know which game it was. I don't know if it was when they went to Dallas.
Yeah,
I don't know. But I'm
right.
sure there was a point of last season where he said, man, this is sunk. This is
Yeah,
this is not it. It may not have been against BC. It may have been later. I don't know. But I'm sure there was a point in last season where he said, like, I just got to get to this year. We're just got to suck
yeah,
it up and take this gut punch and go. And yeah, you're exactly right. Like, he very easily could have hedged. He very easily could have said,
yeah.
like, man, we are starting from. I mean, like, you could very easily say,
Right,
like, hey man,
right. We're starting from back from scratch.
we're
Yeah,
starting from scratch, and we are going to rebuild this thing the right way. And everybody would have known what that's not a negative thing.
right,
That's
right,
not a, oh man, he's setting us up for just a bowl appearance, right? Like, I mean, that's what he would have been doing. But like, nobody would
right.
have complained about that because people appreciate transparency, I think. Like,
I
no
agree.
Florida State fan is out here thinking like, yeah, man, we just got to get one break and we're in Charlotte, right? Like, we
Right, right.
understand like what the what the season is going to be. But I do think that he could have very easily hedged. He could have very easily said, like, hey, man, we got to start from scratch. We got to rebuild this thing. New coaches, new roster. We had X number of players that left and came and this, that, and the other. And it's going to be a process, and we're going to work just like we did from the start. And I mean, again, not to belabor the point, but like him not doing that is a good thing. So anything
I
else
agree.
real high level you want to share or anything you came away with, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the only other takeaway, he seems to be really focused on the details this spring. They hinted at some sort of competition. They've got like 7 teams of players randomly selected. The team is broken up into 7 teams. Position coaches coaching each team. The points basically come down to like, are you on time for everything in a day? If not, you lose a point for everything that you're not on time for, or just stuff like that. Accountability, team culture, and it was something new that they're doing. So is that him recognizing there might have been an issue with that last year? Who knows? But yeah, I thought that was interesting, and a lot of his slides were like about team culture, which you see commonly at these coaching clinics. But I've watched his from last year, and he talked about X's and O's. So I think it's worth noting that his primary focus this year was on team culture. He basically got to like 2 slides at the end about being in 2 different types of athletic stances before the snap. Like the entire thing was culture, toughness. I think he knows what his roots are. Like he's getting kind of back to, I mean, just like a group of 5 team, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but like, what does a group of 5 team have to do to overcome like deficiencies?
Yeah.
And I think he's kind of getting back to that and understanding how important the culture is. And it kind of seemed like that faded last year. So I'm glad to see that back.
No, I agree. Is Florida State as talented as Alabama or Clemson or some of the other tough games?
Right.
No, like that's but they're more talented than like 8 of the teams that they're going to play this year, at least, right? And so like
easily,
if the culture and the buy-in is there, which it did not feel like it was there last year, right? Whether it was or wasn't, the perception is reality. It didn't feel like it was there. I'd say there's a 99% chance, I might be lowballing it, that it wasn't there. The talent will take care of itself, right? Like these coaches have been successful. They're not, again, Mike didn't forget how to coach football over the year, but the culture side of it did seem to be lacking, which is surprising from a Norvell coach team, but we would expect that to change, right? They may not be great this year, but you would expect there to be some kind of bounce back on the way that they play, the culture that is instilled, and the fight, right? In 2020, they weren't very good, but they fought. In 2021, they fought down the stretch. They won 5 of their last 8. They fought, even against Jacksonville State. I mean, like they had some horrific losses, but they fought, against Louisville that year in 21. They were losing by a 10. They came all the way back to making an 8-point game and had the ball. And so, I mean, I think that's what people want to see. Notre Dame, they were getting blown out. They came all the way back. Like it's just, that's what I think people were missing this year. It was like you got punched this year and you just kind of gave up and quit. So, and we'll talk way more about the season. We'll get you more on to talk other aspects and other angles that interest you as we get through spring. I know you'll be up there, but for more of your content, more things that are going on, where can people follow you? Where can they find more of what you do, Clay?
Yeah, you can find me at Clay_Fink on Twitter or X. And then I'm posting articles at noles247.com.
Awesome. Appreciate you not saying 24/7 there. I'm gonna
yeah. I don't know. I've reverted back. I can't even remember which one I was originally hanging my hat on. But
I'm gonna convert everybody over eventually. So Clay, I appreciate you, man.
Appreciate you.